And yeah, let's talk about ACT versus SAT in the current form, what makes them different here. And so the both tests, just about 2 hours to take now, and they test a lot of the same things. You compare it to a few years ago where science was part of the score on the ACT. That's no longer the case. So the SAT covers reading and writing, reading comprehension. Writing will be like English grammar, and it also has math. The ACT has English, math, and then a separate reading section. So it is probably easier to switch between the ACT and the SAT than it's ever been in their history. Okay, so that's an important thing. Now, let's just break down with the SAT what students will find. The SAT is now an adaptive test. It's taken on the computer, and students start off with a module of average difficulty. Depending on how they do, it then goes to a module that's easier or more difficult. Usually, if students get about two-thirds of the questions right, they then go on to the harder module. And then if they get less than that, they're onto the easier module. The reason they do that is it enables the test makers to assess students' ability in about two-thirds the time. If they didn't have this, they would need to give everyone the same test, and it would take 3+ hours to do of testing. So they're testing people just on where they're running into the most difficulty and focusing on that. So students definitely find the second module, if they are getting the tougher version, they find that to be a bit more challenging. So that's an important thing to be aware of. And students do this on the computer. They bring their own device. They can use an iPad, a laptop. I tend to recommend using a laptop because you have a larger screen and the whole keyboard there that you can use for certain things. So that's a pretty nice thing to have available. And the SAT builds in a lot of things to the testing platform. They have a Desmos calculator, and if we have time, I might show you some of the cool things with that. They can also use their personal graphing calculator. It allows them to mark questions for review. They can annotate on the screen. So spending a bit of time with the Blue Book application, which is what they have for the SAT, gives students an advantage on test day because they're not trying to fumble around and figure out what they need to do. Okay. Now we look at the ACT overall structure here. Most students will take this on paper. They would have the option to do it on a computer, but it is not an adaptive test. If they take it on the computer, it's the same sort of experience they'd have on paper, except it's just on a screen. And the timing on this, they have the English to start. It's its own English section instead of having a combination with the reading. Then there's math. There's a reading section, and they have some optional parts here too. They have a science section that's optional. They have a writing section that's optional. The science, a lot of students might want to take that because it's relatively new that we're not having the science as part of it. And so a lot of colleges, especially if someone is interested in studying something in the sciences, engineering, medicine, they may want to do it. If you have a student interested in Boston University, they have come out and said, we want students to do the science section if they are submitting test scores. But if you're not sure, just check with the college itself, check with their admissions website or call them up and see what they recommend that you do. Now, as far as differences between these, let's talk about some major differences here because there are a lot of similarities, but there are some major differences. So one big thing is that on the SAT, they have short reading passages. So each reading passage is just about a paragraph, no more than 150 words. Now, just because it's short doesn't mean it's easy. You have these questions and some of these texts that are very, very complex. So sometimes people think, oh, it's short, it's super easy, but that's not the case. You have some really in-depth reading you might need to do. They do test vocab a bit more on the SAT. They have word and context questions. So doing some work where you memorize vocabulary can be really helpful to performance there. They test fewer math topics, but they're more in depth. Just in general, I'd say the SAT is a deeper test and the ACT is a bit broader. Okay, so the SAT a bit deeper, ACT a bit broader. And then students do this on their own computer or their own device. Now, the ACT, it has longer reading passages. So the passages there are like 750 words or so, and they have 9 questions that accompany them. Vocab's a little easier to work with. There's not as much vocab memorization that you need to do with the ACT. The ACT is generally a little more straightforward, but the questions are a bit faster paced. Now, the way I would describe it is as a tutor, when I'm explaining an SAT question, it's requires often a bit more time, a bit more depth to really break it down, to paraphrase the text, to really understand what's going on with the assumptions and the evidence and all that. With the ACT, there is a good bit of explanation involved, but it's usually not as the depth is not required to break down all the details of what's going on. And they do have a broader array of grammar concepts as well as math concepts. So you see some things like logarithms, matrices that you would not see on the SAT, and you do see those on the ACT. And there is, of course, the optional science section. So that's consideration too. Now, just to preview something else here, you might notice the way that these are broken down. So the SAT has reading and writing for half of its score. It is math for the other half. ACT, a third's English, a third's math, a third's reading. So something to consider when you're thinking about SAT versus ACT. If you feel stronger with math, the SAT potentially might work out better because half the score comes from math. And then you look at the ACT, just a third of the score comes from math. So if you are better with reading and writing, the ACT might be worth trying. Now, usually people, if they're good at one, they tend to be good at the other as well. But that's just something to consider as you think about which one might be a better fit for your child. Okay, going on then, let's go back to that PowerPoint. Let me get that pulled back up here for you. And we'll go on to the next bit.